After warning you members of the press against treating this presidential campaign as a horse race, now that I have ceased active campaigning, I can't resist noting that the Hilton management has put us in a horse racing room. If we can't escape the horse race, I suppose we can at least be grateful we're in the thoroughbred room rather than in the Hilton Racket Club. 6 months ago, I launched this campaign with the observation that I believe I am now more ready than at any previous time in my life to lead this nation towards justice, honor, and peace. I also made a pledge on that day that I would say nothing about any issue in this campaign except what I honestly believe. We have had no poll taker, no media expert, no speechwriter, no professional political strategy board. We have run one of the most tightly staffed and I must say meagerly funded presidential campaigns in American history, with expenditures of $90,000 combined in the first two tests, Iowa and New Hampshire, and about $330,000 in the third state, Massachusetts. But we end up with no debt and no unpaid obligations. Two of the central figures in this effort have been my oldest daughter, Anne, who managed the campaign office and directed the volunteers, and my youngest daughter, Mary, who was the finance director of the campaign. I'm pleased to say that these two dedicated and I think remarkably talented daughters not only gave up good jobs to undertake these tasks, but they did it without complaint and on a more than full-time basis, and for that I will be grateful for the rest of my days. I also want to thank Paul Sullivan and George Cunningham, who managed and directed the campaign from the Washington headquarters. One of the unexpected but blessed byproducts of this campaign is that having started out with some difference of opinion in the family as to the wisdom of it, I think I can now tell you that it has united this family more than any of the other campaigns I've been involved in the last 30 years, and that alone would make it worthwhile. Another unexpected byproduct for me has been the generous response of both the public and the press. Indeed, I have been variously described with titles I probably don't deserve as the conscience, the peacemaker, and the elder statesman of the Democratic Party. I seem to have won a lot more titles than I have votes. Quite frankly, I would rather have been the candidate than the conscience, and I would rather be president than peacemaker, but these new titles are better than some of those that I gained after 1972. Whether or not I can carry these new banners remains to be seen, but I think it's going to be an interesting challenge to try. I'm still trying to define what, if any, role there is for me in the politics of 1984 and beyond, but the purpose of this press conference this morning is to try as best I can to answer any questions that you might have about that or about any other aspect of the recent campaign. So I accept your questions now, as well as any free advice as to the road ahead. Yes.
What will you suggest to your delegates if they ask you who they should vote for?
Well, I'm not going to make any suggestion on that score. In the first place, McGovern delegates are very independent-minded creatures. You don't throw McGovern support easily. I've found that these people are difficult to throw. But beyond that, I think it would be a mistake even for me to try. I've considered that question over the last 48 hours, but I've come to the conclusion that it's better for me not to back any particular candidate, but to do what I can to elect the nominee of this party.
Senator, Would you expect Senator Hart to perhaps view that as somewhat of a slap after the dedication loyalties of 1972 if he did not jump on the Hart bandwagon at this point?
I don't think he expects that at all. I think Gary Hart knows very well that I have great respect and admiration for him, as I do for Fritz Mondale, the other current front runner. I think there's enough beef in both of them if they don't turn each other into hamburger.
Since you have acknowledged these labels as the conscience of the party, the elder statesman, would you say that having those labels was a principal failure of your campaign?
No, I would not say that's a failure at all. Anytime you're given titles of that kind, you accept them with a certain amount of humility, since no one can fully carry a banner like that, but also with a measure of pride. I frankly did not get into this effort for that reason. I had no idea how I'd be treated either by the public or by the press, but I must say in both cases the response has been generous, and I think in the end both the public and the press came to the view that this campaign was a worthwhile effort.
What happened? What happened in Massachusetts? Why didn't you come in second?
Well, I guess you'll have to ask the Massachusetts voters. I felt that I came in better than most people had expected. Even the Boston Globe poll did not foresee a 22% finish for George McGovern in Massachusetts or anything like that. I think the Massachusetts voters made a judgment that someone else was a more likely nominee. I found no lack of respect or affection in that state, but these are very tough-minded voters, very realistic voters, and I think they decided that someone else might have a better chance both at the nomination and at the election in the fall, and who knows, they may have been right.
If you were the conscience of this campaign, who's the conscience now, or does it have none?
Oh, I think there's lots of conscience involved in this campaign. We've still got 4 very good men in the race. No one's ever questioned the conscience of John Glenn or Jesse Jackson, for that matter. I don't question the conscience of Fritz Mondale or Gary Hart. These are all men of conscience and principle. We have our differences on the issue, and I've outlined those over the last 6 months. There's no point going into that now.
Mr. McGovern, of the candidates, who do you feel closest to philosophically?
Well, I don't want to really get into that business. Let me just say this, that I was pleased to pick up the press this morning and see Gary Hart staking out what I thought was a very progressive and dynamic position on rebuilding the country's railways, rebuilding its infrastructure, rebuilding its roadways. Those are things that I have thought were important, and I feel very comfortable with somebody talking in that vein. I think that those are the kind of clarifications and advancements in his positions that are going to make the McGovern supporters a little more warm-hearted about the whole effort.
Considering your former affiliation, are you bitter at all that Gary Hart stole part of your show?
No, not at all. Not at all. Even if I was, I wouldn't tell you.
Senator, you did a lot better than many people expected you to when you got in. John Glenn, many people think, may get out to this race, if not today, then quite soon. And he was regarded, certainly last summer and early fall, as the man who would challenge Mondale. He had the right stuff, the movie was out, and yet in that time you at least made a show of it, and yet Glenn has disappointed greatly. Do you have an explanation for that?
Well, I think we've had a lot of unpredictable twists in this campaign. I have to tell you, honestly, that at the time I announced on September 13th, I fully accepted the then conventional view that it was a contest between Glenn and Mondale. And I wasn't at all clear in my own mind which of the two of them would emerge as the eventual front runner. I never anticipated that my old campaign manager, Gary Hart, would be the one to surge out of the long shot status. This was something I had not anticipated. I'm not unhappy about it, but it was not something I had anticipated. Neither did I forecast the decline of Senator Glenn's campaign. I think he has a lot of the traditional values that Americans were looking for. Great loyalty to family and community and church, country, the armed forces and all those things. And I don't really know why his campaign hasn't gone better in recent weeks.
Why did Hart's lack of success surprise you? Why does Hart's success surprise you?
Well, I thought after watching his campaign for almost a year that it simply wasn't moving. It wasn't any deficiency that I saw on Gary Hart. It was simply my reading of where the voters were at in terms of that campaign. I guess I just fell into the view that most of you people had, that it was a Mondale-Glenn race. I was told by just about everyone I talked with in the National Press Corps that it had been pretty well reduced to a two-man race in September.
What do you think got it going for Hart?
I don't know, other than that he's a very capable, imaginative man, I think a brilliant man. He understands the techniques and demands of modern campaigning in the media age as well as anyone I know. And he has obviously demonstrated those skills to great benefit to his campaign.
Now, you called him a brilliant man, and you said you were delighted today to see his progressive stance on the infrastructure. That sounds pretty like you're certainly leaning in his direction.
No, I didn't intend that at all. I'll say that Mondale's brilliant and progressive, too, if this will balance it out, because I think they both are. There's some comment that I've seen the last couple of days about being bitter about Gary Hart's rise. That's what I was trying to clear up, because I find either of these men acceptable nominees. I think either one of them can defeat Ronald Reagan in the fall if they don't chop each other up too much along the way.
In that regard, do you see either one as having a tactical advantage with respect to Mr. Reagan, insofar as they might be able to pull crossover votes, independent voters in that regard?
Well, I think that's too early to tell. You know, interestingly enough, while this race has been going on for many months, I think we've just now reached the point where the country's beginning to look closely at both Hart and Mondale. It's true that Fritz has been out there on the point for a long time, but I don't think the country's really looked at him as a leader and as a man. They haven't really seen him, his qualities and the stuff that he has, and the same thing is true with Gary. So we've kind of shaken things down now. Nobody locked it up on Super Tuesday, as was once thought possible. I didn't feel that either one of them came out with a lock on the nomination or with any very clear indication as to which one would do the better in the fall against Ronald Reagan. I think that question's still out.
Senator, there's still several months to go before the Democratic Convention. Are you going to go on making speeches around the country and talking about the defense cuts and getting us out of Central America?
Well, that's my plan. I have been campaigning now for 6 months on a 10-point program, and I'm not going to bore you with all 10 points except to pick out 3 here today that I would like to continue to hammer on and that I would like to press the Democratic Party to consider in their national plank. One is to change our present policy on Central America. I'm very worried about us drifting into another Vietnam-type involvement in Central America. It's not that that area is unimportant to us. It is important. But we have weapons in diplomacy. We have allies in the area that want to help on negotiations. We have economic power. We have trade and technical assistance, weapons of that kind. What we should not use in Central America is military power, either our arms that we're now shipping there in abundance or our military advisors. We certainly should not put troops anywhere in Central America. So that's an issue I'm going to press. And secondly, the issue of arms spending reduction. I'm totally convinced we're wasting money in the Pentagon, and that we're adding to the destabilization of the arms balance between ourselves and the Soviets at the same time. So it's both to get at the waste that's bankrupting the Treasury, but also to get at this destabilization of the arms balance that I would like to see the Democratic Party go on record for a cut in military spending. We should not accept President Reagan's premise that we are behind the Soviet Union militarily. We are not. he says we're behind in every significant category of military power. That simply is not true. And I doubt if anyone here can find an admiral or a general now on duty who will say that we're inferior to the Soviet Union. We simply are not. And the third area that I want to emphasize is my old love for rebuilding the railways. This is something that would really provide a useful economic trade-off for money we could save canceling the MX, the B-1, and some of these other weapons systems. I know that the economy won't take that kind of a shock without some alternative jobs and investment opportunities, and I'd like to nominate the railways to make America best in that field, number one in railways, as the most practical way to divert money we're now wasting in the military sector.
Are you going to make yourself available around the country between now and the convention to make that speech?
Sure I am.
How do you go about doing that?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to have to figure out how I get some invitations and how I can best use my resources. There are a lot of people that have been urging me to do this. It's no secret that a great many people did not want me to drop out of this race, and so while I've ceased active campaigning, I want to keep my voice alive and what influence I have alive, and so you'll be hearing from me. I'm not going to go at this full time. I need a little rest and a little vacation, and I've also got to make a living, which I haven't done the last 6 months.
Senator McGovern, now you raised the specter of the two candidates turning each other into hamburger at one point, and I'm wondering if you are going to accept that mantle of peacemaker that someone placed upon you, and how you perceive it. What do you think they're talking about?
Well, I am going to accept that mantle. I am going to try to be the peacemaker inside the Democratic Party. I know something about the scars and the pains of being assaulted as a front runner. I went through that some 12 years ago, and I don't want to see that happen either to Gary Hart or to Walter Mondale, or if somebody else emerges as the possible nominee, which does not now seem likely. I want that nomination to be worth something. And the one big fear I have right now is that these two front runners will become so eager to overtake each other that they'll do the kind of cutting that we can't stand. I don't object at all to them spelling out their differences and offering honest criticism. That, after all, is what politics is all about. But it should be done in a spirit that makes clear we're going to eventually unite behind the nominee of this party. No character attacks, no excessive bitterness of the kind that is hard to heal.
What do? Do you just capitalize on your friendship with both of them?
I think so. That's what I'm going to try to do. I've already talked with them privately about this, and I'll continue to do that. I think I can have some effect in that area.
Senator, do you think there's a substantial likelihood of a darkness emerging at all?
I don't see that possibility. You never can rule it out, but my guess is that the nominee of the Democratic Party will be the candidate who wins the most primary elections between now and San Francisco.
Senator, quick question. Did you ever at any point in this campaign persuade yourself or feel that you had any chance of winning? And secondly, is this the last McGovern campaign?
Well, on the first question, yes. I thought there was just a possibility that we might ignite something out in Iowa. And I would remind you that a shift of 800 votes from Gary Hart to George McGovern would have had me coming in second in Iowa. Whether I would have gotten the same role out of that going into New Hampshire as Gary did, I don't know. There might have been other questions raised in my case. But it certainly would have been an electrifying result if with a few hundred additional votes I had come in second. When you consider that I spent $50,000 in Iowa, I don't have any abiding regret about this, but I think I remain convinced that if I'd have had another $100,000 to spend in Iowa, I would have had a good chance to come in second. I also had one misfortune in the campaign. I acquired a strange malady called walking pneumonia that I hope none of you get. which reduces your output about 50%, and I went through that business for a couple of months right in the middle of the Iowa operation. That probably made a difference too, but when I didn't ignite it in Iowa, it was probably unlikely I could do it anywhere else.
McGovern, since you have a lot more things that you want to accomplish and you see yourself as a peacemaker in this rest of the campaign, can you see yourself as a vice president?
No, I really can't. That's one thing I don't see in the crystal ball at all.
Would you say no to it?
I probably would. At least I'd try to discourage the person asking me. I don't think I'd be very good at it anyway. I've always said exactly what I think on public issues, and vice presidents are not allowed to do that. So I think I'd probably be a poor choice. I would recommend against me as a vice presidential choice. I forgot the second half of the question about, is this my last campaign? Well, I think it is, but I don't want to sign any pledge to give up a constitutional right.
How about a cabinet post, Senator?
Question,
Pardon?
please.
I really am not interested in a cabinet post. I suppose if it were offered in an area where I have a keen interest, I'd have to think about it. But the notion that I got in this for a cabinet post, I can tell you, is the furthest from my thoughts. I, as a matter of fact, thought that if I had any interest in that area, challenging these other candidates might be the end of that possibility.
What about a return to the Senate?
No, I've been in the Senate for 18 years. I got elected all those years in one of the toughest conservative states in the Union, and I think I've pushed that about as far as I should.
Question, please, for Mrs. McGovern. Are you glad now that your husband ran for president? And can you come up to the microphones?
Yes, I am glad that he ran. I will admit I had many misgivings at first because I didn't want him to take the risk of being hurt again. I guess if I had been more honest with myself, I would have said I don't want to take the risk of my being hurt again. And after I figured that all out, I was glad he ran, and I'm doubly glad he did today.
Yes.
What about running, becoming the head of the Democratic National Committee? Would you consider doing something?
Becoming head of the Democratic National Committee? I think Bob Strauss or somebody would be better at that job than I would. I want to be as candid about this as I can. I frankly don't know what I'm going to do in terms of my professional role here. One of the byproducts is to have a few people talk to me about positions in the private sector, and I haven't ruled out that possibility either.
What do you think the Democrats' most difficult problem is in defeating Reagan?
I think the toughest problem we have is the way Ronald Reagan slides off the issues, even when he makes serious blunders. I thought putting those Marines in Lebanon was a catastrophic mistake at the time it was done, and then to leave them there undefended until 240 of them were killed in a single night. I can't think of any previous president that could have gotten away with that and gone up in the public opinion polls in the next 30 days. The way he was able to sell the invasion of Grenada to the country as a glorious American military triumph over the mighty empire of Grenada. All of these things make me think that we're dealing with a very skillful man in managing the news and managing the media. I don't say that as any reflection on the media, but his skill in being able to handle complicated and difficult issues that would have embarrassed other presidents is amazing. And I think the Democrats are going to have to go after him head on. We cannot let him define the premises of the debate. When he says, for example, that the Russians are way ahead of us militarily, that they are powerful and we are weak, we can't permit that to stand unchallenged. We're not weak. We're the world's most powerful country, militarily, economically, politically, in every other way, except railways. And so that we have to make that case. We can't let him define the premises, as I think he has a tendency to do.
Members of the Democratic Strategy Committee say that it's not enough to criticize Reagan's policies, but you have to come up with alternatives to them. Do you think that the Democratic Party is doing that right now? And if not, how can they go about it?
Well, I think they're beginning to do that, and I quite agree with that analysis. It's not enough simply to lay bare the president's weaknesses. We have to have a clear and attractive and compelling Democratic alternative agenda. I frankly thought I did that very well in the 10-point program that I laid out. I still think that's a good measurement of what we ought to be doing as a party. I wouldn't change it an awful lot, except maybe to strengthen the environmental and health features of it. But the other candidates now, I think, are going to have to stake out clear alternatives to the Reagan posture. They're going to have to do it on foreign policy, on defense policy, and on economic policy. And that's why I was cheered this morning to pick up the press and see that Gary had laid out a rather bold and I thought solid program of rebuilding the physical facilities of the country and doing it in the public sector.
Do you plan to have further contacts with Mr. Nixon?
I don't have any plans for that, but I enjoyed the previous visit.
Excuse me, this will be the last question. Are you worried enough about Mondale and Hart, as you said, making mincemeat out of each other, to ask other party leaders, perhaps Jimmy Carter, even though he is backing Mondale at this point, to join you in the peacemaking role?
Yes, that's precisely what I expect to do, to talk to influential people in the party and across the country to see if we can't exercise a restraining influence on this rhetoric. I don't think anything fatal has been done yet, but I'm just very hopeful that it won't be. I think we're moving into a very critical period now where, as I said earlier, these men are now in the public eye far more than any of us have been thus far in the campaign. It's going to be a crucial period here for the next couple of months, and this is the time when they need to be careful. I don't want them to turn into a couple of milquetoasts that are afraid to criticize each other, but do it in a constructive way and always for the purpose of enlarging the understanding of the public as to where we stand, the differences between them, rather than emphasizing too much the character flaws and that kind of thing that we all have.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now we let these guys get a shot back here. Thank you. I've done it. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
That was great.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for standing with us in the very beginning,
Absolutely,
too.
yeah. That was wonderful. Yeah.